Yes, there's good fast setting epoxies available, but there's a better chance that that club can come apart as compared to using the 24-hour epoxies. The reason being is the quicker the setting time, the more brittle the epoxy tends to be until the full cure takes place. That's something I want you to remember. Now, quick setting epoxies are available in 30-minute, 60-minute, 90-minute, 2-hour, you name it. It could be made. Just make sure to read what the shear strength is on the epoxy. It may read something like 2,900 psi, when psi is short for pounds per square inch, or maybe 3,300 or 4,500. The higher the number, the stronger it's going to be. Equally important is the higher the number, the harder it's going to be to take apart if you need to. Next up, let's discuss some terms that you probably should be aware of regarding epoxies. One is the working time. That's also known as the pot life. Once you mix the epoxy, you only have so long before the epoxy remains pliable and you're able to apply it evenly to the surfaces. This is important because you want to have everything prepared so you can epoxy everything at once. If you're attempting to epoxy 8 irons with a fast setting epoxy with a pot life of 1 minute, well, good luck. I hope you are quicker than me. You may need to epoxy the set in stages. That is, do 3 clubs at a time or 4 clubs at a time if you're working with faster setting epoxy. That's why 24 hours is the best, because you have more time and are less likely to be rushed and make a mistake. The guys in the tour vans make a living catering to the tour players and probably could put everything together in their sleep. Plus, a lot of what they're making is 1 or 2 clubs at a time, not necessarily full sets. Now, our next term is called setting time, or gel time. This is the time where the epoxy becomes rigid, but not fully cured. At this time, you can handle the clubs without fear that the head will turn on the shaft. But I still wouldn't do any activities like swing weighting down a steel shaft that might jar the club loose from the shaft. Wait until the next phase, which is when the epoxy is fully cured, to do that. Now, curing time is often the name of or part of the name of the epoxy, but it's really the time required for the epoxy to achieve its maximum strength and rigidity. It should be noted that some quick setting epoxies can be played after the epoxy has set. Remember the term setting time. For example, you might have a 30-minute quick set epoxy. It has maybe a 1-minute working time. But after 5 minutes, the epoxy has set. In 30 minutes, the epoxy may be hard enough to hit a ball, but over the next 23 hours and 30 minutes, it'll still continue to fully cure. Hope that makes sense. The directions for many epoxies will provide information that the epoxy reaches the full cure strength in 24 hours, but specifically at a certain temperature, like 77 degrees Fahrenheit. If the temperature is cooler than 77 degrees, then it'll take proportionally longer for full cure to take place. If you're building clubs in the winter, where your workshop area gets cold or it's naturally cool like a basement, additional drying time is something to be considered. Or at least put a space heater in close proximity to keep the clubs warm in case the entire workshop will be cool. It's also possible to accelerate the curing at high temperatures or higher temperatures, such as the sizzling weather we're having right now. Some club makers have created heat boxes for this very purpose. This may consist of a wooden box with a lid on a hinge. On 1 or 2 sides, there may be small slits for the shafts to slide or rest through, while the club head remains inside the box. For a heat source, it could be a 100-watt light bulb put on one of those pull chain lamp holders. You might be able to get the temperature hot enough in that box to knock off, let's say, 6 hours of curing time. Still, it's a little faster, but not like the fast setting epoxies. Next up, I want to talk about how to mix epoxy. There are usually two ways. The directions on epoxy containers will either tell you to measure by volume or by weight. For example, if it's a 1-to-1 ratio by volume, you just squeeze out equal amounts, and this could be eyeballed, as I'll explain later. Or it may be, for example, a 10-to-7 ratio by weight. That is, you'll use 10 grams of part A for every 7 grams of part B. So if you're mixing enough for, say, a set of irons, you may use 4.3 grams of part A with 3 grams of part B, or perhaps you use 7/10 of a gram of part A with 1/2 of a gram of part B for only a few clubs. Normally these are non-critical mixtures, and what I mean by that is if you're off just a little bit using too much of one versus the other, the epoxy will still cure, but it may affect the time to reach full cure, plus change the strength slightly. Too much of the hardener will make the epoxy more brittle. Just make sure you're not too far off, otherwise you can adversely affect the strength and the time required for full cure. So here's how I prepare a batch of epoxy. I don't mix by weight, but rather volume, because I find it much, much faster. But if you do want to weigh it, you can either use small mixing cups or masking tape. The tape is cheaper, peels off, and it's disposable. Let's say we want to have enough to do a batch, or the quantity required to epoxy all the clubs in a set or even a single head. I guarantee you the first time you're going to mix too much of epoxy, but over time you're going to figure out how much you're going to need, so you have enough, but not too much that you're wasting it. But we're going to use our example of the 4.3 grams of part A and the 3 grams of part B and weighing it, and that's going to be our top pictures up on the slide. You want to first place a strip of tape or even overlap 2 pieces of tape so the epoxy doesn't overflow and create a mess. So weigh the tape on your scale if there's not a tear button on yours. Let's say the tape weighs 1 gram. Then set your scale to 5.3 grams, then simply pour enough of the epoxy, or part A, onto the tape until you get to 5.3 grams. That means the 5.3 minus 1 is 4.3, and that's what our target weight was. You're going to set that aside for a moment. Remember, you could peel it off and place it on your workbench. Next, take some fresh tape and put it on your scale. Note its weight. And let's just say, for the sake of argument, it's 1.5 grams. At this point, you need to add enough of the part B until you get 4.5 grams on the scale, or 3 grams of material. If you try to do it all on one piece of tape or in a plastic cup, then you got a problem if you add too much of part B. Then you have to factor the right ratio, which can be complicated if you don't excel at math. The other option is you have to start all over. Well, when you're done, you pull that piece of tape with the part B on it and place it so it overlaps the tape with the part A on it. Now you're ready to mix. I wanted to show you that method first so you can see why I only mix by volume. See, most of the component epoxies that come in bottles are 1-to-1 ratios. And here's a quick tip. You want to cut the tips of the bottles